Welcome to Newshour. London has been the scene of a high-stakes showdown today as top US and Chinese officials meet behind closed doors in the UK's capital. With tensions soaring and the global economy on edge, the two superpowers are scrambling to cool a trade dispute that spiralled far beyond tariffs and is now threatening the very backbone of international supply chains. Well, at a semi-secret London venue, negotiators are working to revive a fragile agreement struck in Geneva just weeks ago. A deal that momentarily eased market fears, but now hangs in the balance as President Trump's hardline trade offensive enters a new phase. So will diplomacy prevail, or is the world on the brink of an even deeper economic rift? We'll be speaking to people on the ground in both Washington and Beijing. First, let's go to London and speak to our correspondent there, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, good to see you. You're outside Lancaster House, the venue for today's meeting, and a place that's often used for high stakes but private negotiations between top officials. Give us the latest. Tell us what's going on there.
Well, Guy, the discussions are underway. The delegations have gone into Lancaster House just behind me, which is the venue, as you say, for these talks. Washington asked London to be the host, and I think London was very keen to be so. The UK government says that it believes that a trade war is in no one's interest and that it wants to see positive outcomes from these discussions. Certainly, going into the talks, there's been a lot of focus on rare earth elements and whether more of those can flow from China to the global economy. Clearly, from the American perspective, and the White House has set this out very clearly, their hope is to try and get back to the shape of discussions and agreement that appeared to come out of the last round of talks between the two countries in Geneva last month. International investors are watching very, very closely indeed, given the market turmoil in both directions that we've seen at various times in the trade disputes between Beijing and Washington in recent months. And so investors will be watching very closely indeed to see what outcomes come from this summit here in London. From the UK perspective, very keen to host, as I say, because of the potential impact on global trade, but also because the UK can use this opportunity to have discussions with the Chinese Vice Premier. He already met with Chancellor Rachel Reeves, having arrived in the UK, but the UK can also try and have discussions with those three senior American officials that make up the US delegation and have those discussions to try and move forward with that US-UK trade pact, which was agreed last month, but which hasn't yet fully been implemented or come into effect. So opportunities here for the UK, but as I say, the eyes of the world very much on Lancaster House in London, where the Chinese and the Americans are meeting to see if they can make progress when it comes to trade between the two countries.
Thanks, Ollie. OK, let's go to Beijing now and speak to our China correspondent, Manor Makdoum. Manor, how are these talks being viewed from where you are in the Chinese capital?
Hi, Guy. Well, here in Beijing, these talks are seen as being of critical importance. There's definitely a seriousness and sincerity in these high-level negotiations, following, of course, the phone call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping recently. Both countries are trying to ease trade tensions and build on the 90-day tariff truce, which was agreed to in Geneva last month. Leading the talks are U.S. Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, and U.S. Trade Representative, along with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. The main issues on the table are U.S.-imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, China's restrictions on rare earth mineral exports, restrictions on advanced semiconductor sales, as well as U.S. Restrictions on student visas for Chinese students studying in the U.S. The meeting comes just as China's economy started showing signs of stress. Its export to the U.S. fell to 34% in May, and prices at home are falling. These signals add to the urgency for China to find common ground and ease some of the economic pressure. Overall, the London talks are seen as a critical test. Both sides are under pressure to show progress, especially in trade, technology, and student mobility. Clear outcomes are uncertain. However, these talks signal that a dialogue is continuing even as deeper strategic divisions remain. As always, we will be following the events closely from here in Beijing.
Okay, Manor, thank you very much indeed for that report there from Beijing. Now, as A News has been reporting throughout the day, back in the United States, the White House has taken an extraordinary measure to clamp down on the unrest in Los Angeles surrounding protests against new targets to intensify deportations of illegal immigrants. A staggering 2,000 National Guard troops have now been deployed to the city. Now, this is against the wishes of both the activists protesting and California's Governor Gavin Newsom. But there have been police reports of looting, some violence, and both an Australian and British journalist have unfortunately been injured with projectiles fired by police. Well, to help us make sense of this, let's go now to our man in Washington, Ubay Sharbanda. Ubay, always good to see you. Let's start first with the London trade talks. How is the US administration approaching this then? What does a good outcome look like for the United States?
Well, the feeling here in Washington is that there is a glimmer of hope of what many are expecting to be a potential breakthrough to ease the trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. That's because in Washington, President Trump has dispatched Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, as well as the U.S. Trade Representative in London to meet with their Chinese counterparts to discuss export controls. And we saw a message posted on social media by President Trump last week following his well over an hour conversation with Xi Jinping, in which the American president said that he was encouraged by that phone call. So it seems that Washington and Beijing are stepping down from the ledge when we essentially saw trade between the two countries almost come to a complete halt as President Trump issued the Liberation Day tariffs and the Chinese counteracted with their own tariffs against American products and goods. Of course, the two countries are closely intertwined when it comes to trade, with so many American consumers dependent upon that Chinese supply chain to provide everyday goods as well as supplies for key industries in the U.S. Of course, President Trump, when he initially launched his Liberation Day tariffs on China, saying that he wants to level the playing field when it comes to trade, of course, with China having a massive trade surplus, with the U.S. suffering a trade deficit when it comes to China. And of course, Trump telling Xi Jinping that you need to open your markets to American companies. At the core of the discussions in London are rare earth metals, American access to rare earth minerals that China has essentially a practical monopoly on around the world. These rare earth metals are needed for superconductors. They're needed for high-tech industry. And most of those rare earth metals, which, again, as the word says, they're very rare to find, are located currently in China. On the other side, the Chinese want access to American technology, jet engines, and key components to high-tech processing that the U.S. has also essentially a major advantage over China, with businesses in the U.S. and China saying that they need the trade barriers to finally be that dispute to finally be resolved in order to gain access to the necessary materials that they need to continue doing business. But all indicators here in Washington that a deal is likely to be found between the American side and with the Chinese side, with such a high-level delegation being dispatched by President Trump and by Xi Jinping, and warm words between the leaders of the two countries having been exchanged.
And of course, Ubay, all of this is against a backdrop of this major distraction back at home. Troops on the streets, some looting, foreign journalists dodging rubber bullets. Very serious situation. What's the latest on the protests in LA?
Well, President Trump has issued an order that the troops must be sent in to California to ensure that order and stability is brought to that state, as days of rioting and destruction on businesses, on homes, and attacks against immigration and customs enforcement federal officers and LA police have been taking place. President Trump calling it a migration invasion, that these riots are taking place on the behest of those that are trying to prevent the U.S. government from cracking down on illegal migration in Southern California. Of course, President Trump issuing strong criticism against the governor, Gavin Newsom, of the state of California, and of course the mayor of Los Angeles, saying that they are not taking sufficient action to bring law and order to the streets of LA, where many businesses burned down, shoe stores, phone stores, everyday markets being attacked and destroyed, and their windows being broken in as the federal government attempts to implement President Trump's orders to crack down on illegal migration, with these images of rioters waving the Mexican flag, the flag of a foreign country, amidst tires being lit on fire in the middle of highways and in the middle of streets in Los Angeles. Of course, President Trump, as the commander-in-chief, has the full authority by the Constitution to deploy the National Guard and federal forces into any city and state if there is a serious fear of massive criminality, and if there is a concern that the political officials of that state, given Gavin Newsom's political leanings, are not taking action to bring law and order back to the streets. President Trump's administration criticizing Gavin Newsom, essentially saying that he does not want to take action against illegal migration for political purposes, wanting the votes of those illegal migrants instead of siding with the federal police officers and the troops that President Trump is dispatching to Los Angeles. Real concern that the violence will continue for a few days from now. But President Trump doubling down, sending a new message posted on social media that he will not allow illegal migration in California to win the day.
Ube, thank you. Good to hear your analysis as always. Well, that is all we have time for on tonight's edition of Newshour. Please do check out anews.tv and across our social media channels to stay up to date with the very latest news and analysis. And from all of us here on the team in Baku, thank you for watching.